surprises me about communist officials is that they're not like, not like whipping you or slapping you in the face or putting you under some big interrogation light. They treated us like amazing guests, but they just said, sorry, you just can't be here. And, I didn't relate to being an American then, and I certainly don't very much now.
Meet Ben, an American who sold everything and moved to a small city in China.
I live in a city of only 200 foreigners in the whole city of 2 million people.
For 15 years, he has been living in one of the most politically sensitive areas of China with his wife and 2 kids.
There are military bases out here that, are not posted on Google Maps.
Despite the tensions in the region, Ben organizes tours in the mountains, and sometimes things go very wrong.
Suddenly, about 25 police show up with these body cameras.
He shared what it's like for an American to live under constant surveillance in China.
Americans would think I'm crazy to say that.
What shocks him most when he goes back to the US?
We don't have to worry about that in China.
And what really made him leave everything in the States and start over in China? I'm Max Chernov, let's go.
I'm an American citizen. It's a 7-to-1 ratio from, the Chinese renminbi to the US dollar. So, I can go out and buy a bowl of noodles for $1. My rent to live in one of the nicest apartments in my city is $400 to $500 per month, where in America it'd be $2,000 to $3,000 for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath apartment. So my dollar goes further here. I just get more bang for my buck, literally, and I appreciate that. I can take a 250 kilometer an hour fast train, from here to anywhere in China for $30 to $50. And so that would be my number 2, is just the infrastructure. In America, we just don't have any public transportation. Either you have a private car or you're not going anywhere in America. And in China, there's these amazing, high-speed rail systems, bus systems, everything is just kind of cheaper and more accessible here, which I love. I just went to Lijiang in Yunnan province with my family, and it was $50 for us to take this 24-hour train ride in a soft sleeper bed in a private cabin. In America, that would be $500 to $1,000 to do that. So just the public transportation here, I love. And for me, the third big reason I live in China is I love the mountains and I love the people. There are inconveniences. There are things that are different than American culture. There's disappointing and hard days in China, but overall we love living here because we love the people, we love the mountains, and we love the opportunities it affords us. As an American citizen, I probably couldn't have a travel business, taking people into the Himalayas as I do, here in China. So it's just, we enjoy the opportunities we have as being foreigners here.
What was your first impressions of China?
We just moved from America. We just sold everything. And suddenly, all these things are not working. We have to order bottled water to our house every day. We don't know how to speak Chinese. And so to answer your question, our first impression of China was overwhelmed. We were just like, there weren't that many foreigners here to help us. And we were kind of out on our own in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of Tibet. And it was difficult to move here. We didn't speak any language. So it really took a year or two for us to kind of get acclimatized into the culture. But once we did, we really started to love it. I live in a city of only 200 foreigners in the whole city of 2 million people. So you can kind of think of us as kind of the remote Denver, Colorado of China. And, so there's not a lot of foreigners here. There's not a lot of English here. When we first moved here, we moved into a total concrete box. That at that time, China wasn't quite as developed as far as like the furnishings and what we call the zhongshuo of China, the decorations. So we moved into a concrete box and we had to fully furnish. We spent the first 3 months of our lives fully furnishing this box. It didn't even have a toilet or paint or doors or carpet or anything. And in that process, that was kind of our first impressions of China is dealing with these vendors and these decoration and construction guys. And they'd install things, and the quality of construction was so cheap when we first moved here. The tower racks would pull out of the wall because the concrete was basically just sand. It was a terrible construction. I had a bookshelf fall on my head because these IKEA nails basically just like pulled out of the concrete. So my first impressions of China were we didn't speak any Chinese. We're furnishing an apartment for ourselves, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what have we done?
When I was preparing for this interview, I got interesting quote of yours. So when you grew up, you're not fitting an American dream. Can you elaborate on that and why you didn't fit American dream?
That I've just never really fit into America. I was a Boy Scout. And when I was a youth in high school, I loved nature. I loved going outdoors. I loved being outside. And I also had really, really sweaty hands. And because I had sweaty hands, which is a really kind of a funny small feature, but I just never felt like, like I could never fit in like the American dating scene, or always kind of felt like an outsider. And for that reason, because I was kind of outdoorsy, and just because like I wasn't always in like the popular group of kids, and just wasn't really into like the dating scene, and what most kids are doing in high school, like I always kind of felt like I was on the outside. So for me, like when I went to university, I kind of always knew that I'd probably be living outside of America, because I just didn't quite fit into, the American dream of, buying a house with a white picket fence and all that. I just wanted something more. And that for me kind of excited this interest in traveling the world, because I knew I didn't quite fit into America. I knew there's something else out there for me. And so I started traveling the world. I met my wife in West Africa on what's called the Mercy Ship, which is like a big hospital boat doing volunteer work in Africa. And then from there, our life has kind of been moved overseas, where we've lived in China for the last 15 years. And that's been a really great fit for me.
What's your thoughts about the US? So you left like a long time ago, and then you come back like every couple of years. Then you see some changes probably. So what's your thoughts and feelings when you are in the US?
It's changed a lot since we left 15 years ago. And, I didn't relate to being an American then, and I certainly don't very much now. I'm thankful that I have an American passport. It's opened a lot of, educational opportunities for me and travel opportunities for me. And I'm thankful. I love America. I love the geography of America and, the people of America. But, America is going through a tough time right now. It's more politically divided than it's ever been. The gun safety issue is a big deal. And of course, we don't have to worry about that in China, where there's no guns and very little crime. In China, I let my 13-year-old daughter just take a taxi anywhere she wants. And Americans would think I'm crazy to say that. Most countries say, I never let my 13-year-old daughter walk around by themselves. But in China, it's so safe publicly. There's cameras everywhere, and therefore you're kind of safe all the time. So I just see America just struggling a lot with crime, drug addiction. There's increased homelessness since I've left, more political division. It's just become kind of a, I don't know. Yeah, if you follow Facebook, you know that there's just a lot of controversy around America, and it's for me. I've just never really related to all that political tension and strife and conflict, and so for me, China is just kind of a safe, nice alternative to that.
Any like interesting or memorable stories from your time living in Tibet, or like with the tour groups that you done there? Any like memorable stories that you can recall?
One place in particular, I was hiking these really, really remote mountains in Gansu province, which is out here in Western China, a place that we lead trips to. And we're doing a backpacking trip for, I think, 5 or 6 days out in these mountains. And we kind of just descended in the mountains into this tiny little village of maybe 100 people. And, these people had definitely never seen a white person before. A lot of the village didn't have running water, electricity, probably a lot of them didn't have access to like Western media. So I was definitely very, very novel for them. And at that time I had a big beard and kind of long hair. And as I descended, from the mountains into this tiny little village, this dark Tibetan guy who, obviously had never seen a foreigner before, he looks at me and he goes, "What the hell is that?" In his like thick Tibetan dialect. And my guide helped me interpret the sentence. And I was like, "Why did he say that?" He's like, "Well, the man doesn't know if you're actually animal or human. He doesn't know if you're like a Yeti coming down from the mountains,
what?
Or like a yak, or like a white person, or like he'd never seen a white person." We didn't have any context for like what I was. And so it's often pretty fun to travel into these villages, and they've never seen a white face or white skin, or eyes that don't look like theirs. So we get a lot of crazy reactions as we travel into these places. And that's kind of our goal. Our goal as a travel business is to get people out into these wonderful untouched places that haven't been kind of ruined by big bus tourism in China. So that's one of my favorite stories. I think it kind of captures what we do at Elevated Trips.
Did you have any problem with the local police in China?
Occasionally, yes, we do. We live in a sensitive area, living in Western China, with a lot of different ethnicities out here, and occasionally, because we kind of live in kind of the middle of nowhere of China, there are military bases out here that are not posted on Google Maps or Baidu Maps. It's kind of out there, and occasionally we're traveling through the mountains. I remember one time we were on a rock climbing trip And we're climbing, and we're doing these day climbs, and we're going to sleep there in tents. And then suddenly, about 25 police show up with these body cameras on them, and they're like, "Oh, you didn't know this, but you're about 1 kilometer away from a military base." And so we didn't, obviously we didn't have any bad intent being out there, but they took us in to quote unquote drink tea, which is basically where you you get taken in and kind of censured for being a place you shouldn't be, in this government office. And the police just said, "Please don't come back here. We know you didn't know, but if you ever come back here, we will have to revoke your visas." So so that kind of thing happens occasionally, where we're out, and I'm traveling to some pretty wild places, and occasionally you encounter those police or those military outposts, and we're just very respectful and say, "Sure, sorry, we didn't know, and we won't come back to this area."
So it's called drinking tea.
Drinking tea, yeah. Any expat that lives in China, or especially Chinese, will know that the drinking tea is a code word for you get invited in for a strong talking to with the police. So yeah.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
Because they actually serve you green tea during this kind of interrogation interview process. So, honestly, they were very kind. They were strict. They were very strict, but they were kind. They didn't mistreat us. They just said, just don't come back here again. So that's kind of how it is. And that's one thing that surprises me about communist officials, is that they're not like, not like whipping you or slapping you in the face or putting you under some big interrogation light. They treated us like amazing guests, but they just said, "Sorry, you just can't be here."
You mentioned that Chinese people are hospitable, very hospitable. Any example of Chinese hospitality, maybe a story that happened to you, like something that's very fascinates you from your time there?
I have a backpacking business, and there's moments, we're out camping, and we have to, maybe it comes down raining, and suddenly we have to bail out of the camping trip. Like, where are we going to go? We're in the middle of the mountains, and then we go down to the nearest village, and they'll just take us in, and they'll, we show up at the door unplanned with no invitation. In America, you'd probably get shot. By someone's door. And we show up at someone's door, and they just come on in. We have a bed for you. They move out of their own bed. They give us their bed, and they feed us for the night. So that when you've traveled for 15 years, you have these experiences where things don't always work out, to plan. And in those moments, you just have these people that just kind of rise to the occasion and say, "I'll take you in, please come, be my guest for a couple nights. I'll feed you, the best food I have. We'll, kind of slaughter the fattened sheep, and treat you as amazing guests." And so we've just received this, amazing hospitality that I don't think I could ever receive, in America if we were in such a situation.
If you compare life in China versus life in the US, what are the disadvantages? Maybe something that you still don't get used to living in China.
Number one is privacy. Anytime I go out of my home, because I live in such a remote area with not a lot of foreigners, I get a lot of attention. Anytime I'm sitting at Starbucks, usually someone comes, sits at my table, and starts to talk to me and wants to practice English, which can be fun. You make friends, it's fun. But when that happens to you, every single day for the last 15 years, you suddenly think, wow, there's really nowhere I can go that I'm kind of safe and have my privacy. In America, I can just kind of go in a coffee shop and I blend in, and no one's going to talk to me. But in China, they're so curious and hospitable, and I wouldn't even say they're being rude, but they're just interested. Like, wow, I've never seen a white person before. That's novel. So the privacy is a big one for me. It's hard to go anywhere and kind of not automatically be a celebrity. Which is good for your self-esteem, but not necessarily good for you try to do some work by yourself. So the privacy is probably a negative. The other big negative for me in China is that here about 80% of men smoke in the public. And, anytime you're outside in a restaurant, I've talked to many of my restaurant friends and say, why don't you make it a no smoking restaurant? They say, well, we get zero business if we ban smoking here. Even if smoking is legally publicly banned, the restaurants have to allow it because otherwise no one's going to be there. So that's part of Chinese culture, which means when you go out to eat, you're probably going to be smelling cigarette smoke all the time, unless you're in, a very specific, foreign restaurant or, 5-star hotel or something. So even in the airport, restaurants, so the public smoke is everywhere, in elevators, it's everywhere. So that's kind of, as an American, we don't love the smell of cigarette smoke in public, but that's part of the reality of China. So those are probably two of my lesser favorite things in China. And I'll also say the public noise. There's you go to Japan, you ride the subway, it's like pin drop quiet. You go to Thailand, everyone's like very quiet and respectful, and sotika, and very very nice. But in China, totally opposite. You probably travel around China, Max, and there's just noise all the time. Every shop is like blaring like modern techno music. Guys are on the plane. People are just watching movies on their phone with no headphones. People, I was just on a plane 2 days ago. A guy was on his phone till the moment the airplane took off from the ground, basically yelling on the phone. Just noise all the time, everywhere around you. And the Chinese culture is lively, it's exciting, it's wonderful, it's hospitable, but it's also very noisy. And so those are probably like my top 3 dislikes as far as privacy, smoke, and public noise. I think those are kind of the 3 things. But those are minor things.
You're from not from a big city in the US. What do you think the people in your state, in Ocean Town, what they don't get about China? What's the biggest misconceptions about the place for, average Americans?
I think a lot of people watch the news and get their information from there. And what I encourage people to do is come to China and see it for yourself. There's a lot of anti-Chinese media and anti-government things that are going around America. And I just, maybe the government is what it is, but come and actually visit China and see the people, because, the people are the real life of China, and the people are extremely hospitable, extremely kind. I've never, as an American living here 15 years, I've never had any problems. If anything, I say people have been more welcoming to me than in America. They go out of their way to help me. So, there's a lot of bad and probably misinformation on the American media, and I encourage people just come and see it for yourself. Rather than posting comments on YouTube videos that you don't know what you're talking about for a country you've never been to. Come to China and see what it's really like. There are cameras everywhere, but there's also an amazing people and an amazing hospitality and amazing culture.
But what are the other misconceptions about China? I don't know. That's people are don't have any freedom, or it's all like communist country. I don't know what you came across. What's the misconceptions you saw from your American friends? You heard from your American friends?
Yeah, China's one of the few seriously communist countries in the world, and but I think one of the misconceptions is that actually, in everyday life, it really just feels like very capitalist. I think China's like the second largest importer of luxury goods in the world, right? And so you have people. I see more Mercedes, more BMWs, more Lamborghinis in China than I see in America or even, Dubai. So there's just a lot of wealth here. I'd say that the standard of living is very, very high. People think China's poor. They think they're, kind of held down by communism. But, the communism is really more of a form of kind of control, a way to control a huge population of 1.4 billion people versus like an economic system per se, where everyone's like, quote unquote, equal in social status. So I think that's a misconception, is that people think China's are all kind of poor and living on the street and living kind of in an equal social platform. But really there's a lot of wealth here, and there's also a lot of business opportunity, as maybe more than in America as well.
You mentioned that the cameras are everywhere in China. Does it bother you? Do you feel restricted, or your freedom restricted? Especially being American, freedom is one of the biggest values for American.
For Americans, individual freedom is probably our highest value as a national people, and that's okay. That has its pros and cons. But for me, there are cameras everywhere. Literally every time I go through a stoplight, it's taking a picture of my car and my license plate. Literally, every 50 meters there's a camera everywhere. Any restaurant you look in, every public taxi you look in, there's a camera always taking your picture. So for an American, I think that's a hard sell. Most Americans aren't super into losing their privacy, either to Facebook or to the government. But for me, what you kind of lose in privacy, you gain in public security and safety. And for me, I'm totally fine to make that trade. I don't have anything to hide. I'm not doing anything wrong anyway. So I know that there's cameras everywhere. There's a moment where you're like, man, it is a little bit invasive as far as privacy. But at the same time, that's also the reason there's no crime, and it's so safe. I've literally left my phone out on a restaurant table for hours, and I come back, hours later, and it's still there. I don't think that would happen in any other country where you can just leave an iPhone out and no one has stolen it, no one has taken it. So for me, what I lose in privacy, I appreciate that I gain in public security. So I'm fine with that trade, although most Americans probably would not be.
Can you say in Chinese, maybe like 1 or 2 sentences, what's the best thing for you about living in China?
你好，我特别喜欢住在青海省，我住在青海西宁，我在这里是导游，我特别喜欢跑步，特别喜欢藏族文化，这个是我最喜欢。So,
what was it?
Just I like living in Qinghai province. I like living in Tibet. I like the culture here. I like the mountains. Yeah, basically what I tell people.
How locals react when they see you, a foreigner, and then when they hear you speaking Chinese?
Like kind of floored. Yeah, yeah. They, actually, just I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I was in taxi, and my Chinese is not perfect as far as tones. I'm sure the Chinese can comment on that in the section below. But so it's definitely not perfect. But I feel like after 15 years, it's definitely enough to get around. And I was in a taxi yesterday. And I was speaking what I thought was like pretty good Chinese, about the address, where I'm going. I'm making conversation with the taxi driver, but. So like while I felt like my speaking was pretty on point, like the driver just like couldn't understand me, not because they couldn't like hear the words or make sense of the words, but when they saw the white face, they couldn't, it was
connect it, yeah.
Yeah, they couldn't make the connection. Like, there's a white face. He shouldn't be able to speak Chinese. So, even though I was speaking properly, they couldn't hear it because their expectation like didn't allow them to do that. And so they just kept being like, "I don't understand. I don't understand what you're saying. You're a foreigner." I'm like, "Just listen to my words. Like, don't look at my face." Look at my words. So sometimes we do get that. People are quite surprised, like, "Whoa, shocked!" That, and then they usually kind of jump into conversation. It's kind of fun to,
For you, do you call it home now?
Yeah, I'd say so. You kind of have this culture. You've probably, I think, other people have discussed this with families, and living abroad is this idea of this third culture kid, or TCK. It's like, I don't really belong in America. I don't really belong in China. I'll never be considered a Chinese citizen. Everywhere I go, like no matter how much fluent my Chinese, I will always be called Lao Wai, or old foreigner, which is not a term of disrespect, but it's just a term of identification. Like, you are a foreigner. Like, you don't belong here, and so and yet I also don't feel like I belong in America. So I kind of live in this almost weird stasis, between America and China as this third culture being, and I'm okay with that. I don't necessarily find my identity in where my passport is, or where my visa is, but. Yeah, so for us, that's just something expats struggle with, and you probably struggle with living in Singapore. Am I Russian? Am I a Singapore guy? Like, who am I? And yet I'm not really part of either of these cultures. So where do I fit in between?
Would you move back to the US?
Probably not. Not if we didn't have to. I don't. There's not much, very much career-wise for us in America anymore. I have a backpacking and adventure travel business. My wife has a CrossFit business. We've built our lives here. Our kids' education's here. Their friendships are here. Also, if we ever just couldn't live in China for some reason, if we couldn't get a visa to live here, or policies changed or whatever, we'd probably stay in Asia somewhere, maybe Bhutan or Nepal, or places like that still have that kind of Tibetan Buddhist culture, but in a different place. So ultimately, I think we relate to Asia, and we like it. I mean, this is where our life is.
What's the meaning of life? I don't know if you figured it out, but
wow, I didn't know. I didn't know that one was. You're such a deep guy. That's cool. The meaning of life. So you have this thing called the Westminster Catechism, which is it's this big like religious document that that asks this question: what is the meaning of life? And there's a longer version, but the shorter version of this Westminster Catechism says our whole purpose as people is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And for me, that's what it's about. When I live out here, like I'm out in nature, I'm enjoying what God has made for me, and it's a job for me, but it's getting out, it's being where I'm supposed to be. And for me, that's the meaning of life. It's just enjoying God and doing what He's asked me to do, and just being who He's asked me to be. And so, that's for me what gives my life meaning, is serving people, enjoying what He's already given me.